Hello, everyone. Autumn here, and today I'm speaking with a very special Oklahoma filmmaker. Let's get started. Introduce yourself for me, please.
My name is Laron Chapman, and I am a freelance filmmaker, primarily a writer, screenplay, and director here in Oklahoma City.
What an icon. Yeah. So, within all of that, those three core things that really push towards like a filmmaking leader, which I
Mhm.
love, what prompted your interest in that? What made you want to start writing? What prompted interest in film? Give me the lore, give me the details.
It's very interesting when people ask me that question because I think when we think of artists, like there's an idea that we just do these things for fun, for the creativity of it all, and I do think that those things are true. But for me, and I do think for true artists, like it's a need. It's something I have to do more than something that I necessarily just want to do. Because as a screenwriter, I feel like when I'm telling stories and when I'm creating these worlds, it's more so me working through things in my own life, trauma that I've experienced, or feeling like I don't have the words to say out loud, but maybe can articulate better in the medium of the film aspect of that. And so in many ways, I feel like yeah, like I feel like it comes from personal experience. It comes from a need from me personally to get a message out and to, as they say, that art is a form of expression. I do believe that it's an expression of, your innermost being. And I feel like with every project that I do, it's been a personal journey for me. And normally it takes a personal toll as well in some ways. It for better and for worse sometimes. It's cathartic in many ways for me. So.
Yeah, a classic tortured artist viewpoint in a small way, but I completely relate to that. Anything and everything that I have written, and I think you've written quite a bit more than I have thus far, but I really understand that it's a heart project. It's not just something that you're putting out into the world. It's a small piece of you that goes into what you end up writing and what you've experienced and helping others feel seen in that. But within that, why movies? You could paint, you could write poetry, you could do all of those other things, but what is it about movies that has struck you in a way where that feels like the most fitting medium for you in most cases?
I think because it's a collaborative art form, it encompasses so many different types of artistic trades, from, as I mentioned, writing, directing, acting, hair and makeup design. There's so many different forms of creativity that go into it. And I just love that community of artists who are experts in their respective fields coming together to make one kind of unified piece of work that is really, I mean, as much as we kind of, I guess, celebrate the actors or the above the line people on projects like this, these movies don't exist without the worker bees that are behind the scenes making everything happen. And it really is a machine. And I've always just been fascinated by how the sausage gets made in that regard. But I think the more personal answer to your question would be that I think that movies in many way have the cinema in general has really saved my life. Because as a young, I would say I'm a double minority, I'm a member of the LGBT community. I'm also an African American. And growing up in a very kind of blood red state, if you will, very conservative values. There was a lot of restricting things in society that I don't think I was ever fully able, as a kid at least, particularly growing up in the late 90s into the early 2000s before we've had this kind of I mean, I guess you would say like we're almost where these things became trendy in a sense. Before it was almost like if you uttered those words out loud in public, particularly in school when I was a kid, then it was you were met with a lot of animosity, a lot of bullying, a lot of, and that kind of made us kind of coil inward into ourselves at that age. And so I feel like the movies were what I use as a channel to really kind of escape, the reality of my life for a long time, which sounds sad, but in a weird way, I just felt comfort in cinema, and which is why you'll see me attached very nostalgically to things that I grew up watching because I just remember how they made me feel when I was a young kid, and how safe and seen in many ways I felt by certain pieces of media. And so because of the things that those though that all of these things gave me, I felt like, what better way to kind of, put some of that back out into the world by expressing my own art using that same medium. So yeah, I think that hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
It answered that question and so much more, which I'm very thankful for. Thank you for sharing that. I want to build off of what you expressed, especially in terms of sections of your identity and how that medium really allows maybe a stronger stance in your
Sure.
identity, as well as being able to press a more meaningful representation out into the world. I want to know, um, in terms of movies that you really clung on to as a kid and as a young adult and growing and understanding your identities in a deeper capacity and becoming one with your community in a different capacity. Um, what are the movies that helped you kind of stand in your identity? And how have you felt part of your responsibility as a Black man within the LGBTQ plus community in writing further stories of that nature?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the movies for me as a kid, well, to be fair, it's crazy to think of how much representation and that expression, that representation matters is very, I don't know if people, I mean, it sounds like a clever, like kind of trendy thing to say, but I don't
Yeah.
think people know the full weight of what that means to the people who are in fact marginalized because truly, if you have gone and I've had this, I'll share a little anecdote from college. I was in class, and this is actually the inspiration for the first movie that I directed called You People. The opening scene involves all of these students of all different backgrounds, and the teacher is doing this kind of experiment, social experiment with the class, and she asks all of them to write down the top five things that they identify as. And there's no wrong answers, just there's no, she didn't want to kind of um, coax an answer out of you. She wanted you, what their first instinct was whenever you wrote that down. And after a couple of minutes of doing that, she started calling on the names of everybody. And whenever she, approached, let's say, a young white woman, the first thing that she mentioned that she identified as was like a student or a teacher or a girlfriend or just very simple things that weren't offensive in any regard. But then when she'd call on an Asian person or a black person and every person that was part of an ethnic minority identified as that minority first.
Yeah.
And then when she asked the other Caucasian people in the audience, like, on any of the five things did you list that you were a white person? And not a single person in the class had. And I thought that that was a very revealing demonstration to show you just how top of mind for people who are in marginalized communities that they are forced by no real need, on their own, we'll
Yeah.
say, to actually to feel like that is the first thing that they see themselves as, not because they want to, but because the world sees that first. And so we're not really able, we don't have the luxury of not being able to have that be a part of our identity because the world navigates around that with you. And we have very unique experiences that play directly into that. And so some of the movies that I grew up watching, I was seeking myself in things. And to be fair, at that point early in that of my life watching media, there were not a lot of movies that showed particularly LGBT people. And if they were like a fleeting character that, that was relegated to a couple of traits, like the sassy black friend or the
Well, and
flame.
normally like a punchline, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just something to be mocked at or laughed. If they were there, they were there to be laughed at. They weren't seen as
Yeah.
these three-dimensional human beings, and so it became very challenging. So you'll wonder why a lot of queer men in particular idolized a lot of strong female characters from certain movie, whether it's like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, things that seemed silly or goofy at the time, but it was because it was the closest in range to something that identified with the kind of qualities that we might ourselves like embody in our own lives. And so something that comes to mind is a movie called a cult classic called But I'm a Cheerleader is a huge favorite of mine. And that one felt very radical for 1999 because it was I there you were seeing queer characters were the leads in this story, and it was like poking holes and satirizing this idea of conversion therapy as this ridiculous thing because they all go there to be converted to being straight, and they ultimately wind up being themselves because you can't really, I don't believe you can do that.
Right.
But the idea was just that basically, but even just a movie taking that subject matter and having a sense of humor about it at all, it was like, okay, so I saw myself in that space, so that's something that I really resonated with me. Another movie, Scream, is a huge one for me. I
Yeah.
love horror movies. A lot of people don't understand that there is kind of a queer undertone there. Kevin Williamson himself is a queer man who wrote the story. So if you watch it through that lens, you'll see a lot of the references and characters that people like me would pick up on that maybe
Mm.
the average person wouldn't. And so those are two examples of things that I think spoke to me deeply when I was younger. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank on a surface level, I'm going to say so much wonderful information that you just poured into my cup, which I'm very thankful for. On a deeper level, thank you so much for giving me more of your perspective. I really, really
Yeah.
appreciate that, and I do not take advantage of that. So thank you for the energy that you just transferred to me. What about within your work? And also on top of that, what has been the most, I say has been, how many years have you been a filmmaker in Oklahoma? Answer me that first.
I have been a filmmaker in Oklahoma since 2012, so I'm coming up on 13 years of working here in the state without having to move to LA or New York or Atlanta or any of the big places that you associate with movies these days. Because I really do think like the idea of where you shoot movies
Yeah,
and where you can shoot movies rather is really changing because you thought of all those spaces as the only places to do it, but
yeah,
truly that the model of making films is happening in every state. And if you're a member of those local film communities, as I am mine here,
yeah.
it's kind of like if you know, you know. And I have been working and evolving and thriving in that space. Yeah, for the better part of 13 years. So
That's a crazy amount of time, period. Oklahoma filmmakers take note.
yeah,
Filmmakers who
absolutely.
are in Oklahoma take note.
Yes.
Taking that, taking films that you were able to identify with and films that you have written, let's start at the beginning of your filmmaking career.
Hmm.
What were some challenges that you had in, I suppose, breaking into this industry, beginning to
Yeah.
actually make things and produce your own work? What did that journey look like for you in this community?
It's interesting because as I went into it, I very much went into it with no blueprint, like no
Sure.
blueprint for it, like a blueprint for how other people had made movies, but not a blueprint for how I would fit into that space and
Yeah.
make movies that told stories that I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
And so I feared a lot about the resistance to that kind of storytelling, or whether it would be met with any kind of animosity or rejection of that in that sense. But it was very important to me growing up because I remember a lot of people identified with movies that were in my contemporaries would
Yeah.
identify with movies like John Hughes, has a lot of movies that spoke to a lot of youth, particularly in the 80s into the early 90s. I like those movies too, but maybe not to the same extent. They didn't speak to me emotionally the way that they did to a lot of other people because again, there weren't in any of his movies that I've seen, there were no characters that were people of color.
Mhm.
And you would almost think that colored people didn't exist in any of his in any of the high school. And I don't look at that as something like John Hughes was isolating that group. I just think that that's something he didn't identify with either. So he, he's speaking to that demographic. But so I've always, when people ask about like, I'm not a big fan of like remakes and reboots, and that seems to be like the model for so much that's happening right now. But the exceptions that I would make is if you're gonna remake something,
Mhm.
something like The Breakfast Club is due for an update
Yeah.
with maybe a queer or non-binary character, people of color, a whole different, and speak to all those issues because I feel like that would be actually a very interesting conversation speech to have
Yeah.
that diverse group of a cast together to mining through issues that were not explored as early as in the 80s and 90s. And so and call it the brunch club or something. Look, I'm just saying it's writing itself. Maybe I'll write it. I don't know. But
That's your
so
next project, actually.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
But I guess your question though was asking like
The most
um
challenging part of your beginning as a filmmaker.
I feel like it was me getting in my own way, honestly. It wound up
Okay.
being surprising that I had fostered a lot of goodwill over because I think I worked in film for 6 years
Okay.
on the crew side of things
Okay.
before I set out and said, "Hey, I went to college to become a movie director and to make my own things. It's nice that I've been working consistently on other people's projects, but it
Sure.
would be really nice to have my name on something that really spoke to my own experience." And since no one had really done it that I knew of, I mean, I don't want to say I'm a first, but I can't when I'm hard pressed when I ask anybody in my creative spaces, do you know another black or queer person that has made a movie that locally here from our community that and I don't if they are, I don't know them, or they haven't been discovered yet. And so I said, if that's the case, and if I'm gonna be that person, then I'm taking a huge responsibility in making sure that obviously, I know I don't speak for everyone in either one of those communities, but to have a voice from my own point of view, I decided to tell my first film, You People,
Yeah.
which is dealing with a young black man who was adopted by a white family who has really no true insight into his own history, his own lineage, and he's grown up in a very kind of affluent, privileged, community. And his best friend is a white guy who is not from an affluent community, who is more in the urban scene in that regard. And so they're kind of these polar opposites, if you will. And it's set in college. The main character, he is very attracted to this young girl on campus who's very activisty, part of all the clubs and all of the issues, all the buzzwords,
Sure.
and he wants to impress her, but he's under the impression that she's only into a stereotypical black man, and he doesn't even himself comedically know what that is or how to do that. So he has to consult in his white friend to help him, in this that's a whole makeover transformation sort of thing. Lots of comedic explorations of stereotypes and how silly those things are. And I think the message at the end of it is, of course, he does not wind up changing. He remains being himself. And that is the point of it, is there's not this kind of instruction man, I think is in the script that I wrote, that if I probably remember, if I'm quoting myself, there's not an instruction manual for how to be black. You're just born that. And so whatever that is for you is what that is. So when someone says, well, you don't listen to rap music, you don't have to. I listen to all music. I listen to country, I listen to all of it, like so. And I got teased for that a lot as a kid, like why do you listen to the Chicks? Why do you listen to all of these different, like, why aren't you, and it was just kind of a because that's what my mom listened to, or that's what
Yeah.
so I
Just
I
having a
just
good time.
having a good time. I
Yeah.
I grew up in a multiracial family, so it was very hard for me to see to understand or relate to people who didn't understand why I was so open-minded about things. Like
Yeah.
so in a weird way, I was kind of insulated from that until I got into social settings like school or college and things like that, where people challenged that in some way and there was resistance to that. So I think my challenge for the most part was staying true to me throughout the entire process, being authentic to the stories that I wanted to tell,
Mhm.
and just set a hope and prayer that people would respond to it. And thankfully, when I set out to make my first movie, um, it was in 2017 that we shot it. The overwhelming support from that 6 years that I'd spent on films,
Yeah.
whether I makeup artists, sound people, camera people, all those people I already knew and had built a relationship with, and they all came to work on my film. It was during the first Trump presidency in 2016 that he had just won. And so there was also this kind of like need, at least with that in that space, where
Yeah.
people were like, I really want this story that you're telling to be put out into the world because I think it's the message we need right now. And so there was kind of this community of like artistic activism kind of coming together to help me buoy me into making this first movie, and then it was a success, and it's now available on Peacock for people who have that streaming service. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me is truly just not losing myself in all of it. And every roadblock that I face, I have to remember that I have a greater calling that I'm trying to do, and staying true to that is where I'm gonna resonate with the most people. So
I'm really excited to talk with you. And I have been since the beginning of this interview. But everything you just said is part of the reason as to why I'm so excited for this interview. And there will be moments of this interview where I just get to like take a breath and just smile and absorb what you're saying. So don't mind me.
yeah.
Okay, now that you've gotten through that, would you say that you still struggle with that? What does your everyday look like in terms of doing filmmaking all of the time? Do you do that full time? And how do you manage that? And I do ask that specifically in this economy, admittedly.
Yeah, I made my first movie in 2017,
Right.
and it's 2025, and I am just now embarking on my second film. So that gives you an indication that it is not without obstacles to do that, both financially. Making independent films are very is a it's a beast. It's something that is really not for the faint of heart, and it's not for people who aren't willing to pour everything into it, because the chances are that you may not get to make it right away. It may take some time. It may not happen the way you want it to, but I think you're always supposed to create, even in the pauses, even in the moments where you're waiting. It's like do something that's building that's honing in on your craft in the lulls in between the progress, because I do think that creativity and your growth as an artist, it can't stagnate for so long. It's like a muscle. You have to constantly be working on that muscle, so that when those opportunities do come your way, as I've recently just gotten the funding for my second movie in 60 days, we raised 50 grand, and that's just
That's a,
insanity to me. I'm like, I guess I said a couple of things that meant something to a couple of people, because people, again, in this economy, like, to be able to give their hard-earned money because they believe in something that you're saying or something you're putting out there,
yeah,
it says a lot, and I really do think that if you're working in this industry, like, fostering those relationships are so important,
yeah,
because this community, it is a community here in Oklahoma. And I do think before we get to Hollywood levels, if we can just stay true to the essence of that community-led aspect, then we're going to keep making really great and impactful work here, that doesn't feel commercialized, that doesn't feel, you know what I mean, like overproduced, over polished, but like, as you mentioned, speaking from the heart, like, because I find that that's what indie films are.
yeah.
It's getting to the authentic, the authenticity of the artist that's telling the story. And so, like, I, as a freelancer, there is the anxiety of not having a job for 2, sometimes 3 months, and then suddenly having a job that lasts 2, 3 months, and that makes up for the time you have there. And so that's something that you definitely have to go into it knowing is that since this is not LA or New York, the output of work is very competitive to get on.
Mhm.
But whenever it always for me comes up in the wash by the end of the year.
Right.
And now that I've had 13 years of experience doing it, I no longer freak out when it's been a little while since I've gotten a call or an offer for a job. I'm like, am I ever going to work again? It does come to mind a lot, but eventually something comes along. So I think my day-to-day experience is really waiting on the phone to ring until I get a call. And I think because I've worked here for so long, there's
Hmm.
enough people that I've engaged with or have worked with me so that whenever a certain role or something that they know I'd be uniquely qualified to do, they're like, hey, you should call Laron, and then I get an email or I get a call, and that's kind of, and then we go through the whole rundown of what I've done in the past and what have you, and then typically we go over rates and dates as we call it, and then it's kind of it's very like feast or famine. As soon as you're busy, you're more busy than you've ever been in your life, and you can't answer your phone and you don't know who you are or anything. And then you come up for air when a project's over and you're like, what do I do with all this idle time? Because the adrenaline rush of being on film sets is very just, it's infectious to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it is very highs and lows and peaks and valleys. But so I think that's really what my day-to-day experience is. But whenever I do have strong lulls, like longer than usual lulls, I try to, again, as I always say, always working on something, even if it's just personal projects for myself, whether that's
Yeah.
let me dust off that old screenplay and start reworking it or start a new one or what have you, so that there's just always something. I'm always, again, strengthening that creative muscle for myself. So
Absolutely. That makes total sense. And I want to know more about what doing this freelance really means in terms of practically, whatever that means. I want to know like what's the kind of film work that you get called to do and how do you keep making it fun? And you might end up repeating some things that you just said. But I really want to know more of those details on realistically what that means and what that looks like.
I do think that it's so funny when people ask me, because we've done this before, where I know people who are camera people,
Sure.
and that's what they do.
Hmm.
When they get called onto a movie, they get called to work in the camera department, and that is what they do.
Yeah.
I am not a camera person. Like that is not what I do. But I respect them and I know how to
Sure.
communicate with them, but I do not on a technical level know how they do what they do.
Right.
And so there's a certain degree of like finding what your strengths are, what you're capable of doing. I started at the very bottom, like most people do, as a production assistant. And I think it's a great way, entry level job to learn how the whole machine works.
Hmm.
You get to kind of rub shoulders with every department and see what everybody does. And I do think you learn a lot through osmosis, just being present around, seeing everyone in their process, and seeing how, oh, so that's how this comes together, and that person does this, and this person does this, and it becomes this big like. I don't know, like this big puzzle that's coming together where you do kind of see like, oh, okay, so I always wondered who did that job, and that now I see there is an actual person who holds this thing. Like so. I started there as a production assistant, and I gravitated towards the assistant director department. The
Yeah.
first assistant director, who's the one always screaming at everybody on set.
Right.
And then I've worked at I've worked as a production coordinator.
Okay.
So in the office, as I'll say this, I'm 35, and I'm not 20 anymore, and I started this when I was in my 20s.
Hmm.
Production assisting is arduous, like like daunting, exhausting work. All of it is because you're working 12 to 15-hour days, no matter which
Sure.
department you're in.
Right.
But if you're at the bottom, you're doing the most grunt work. And so you'll be tired in your bones when you leave from set, but then you somehow get energized to do it all over again. And it's just this big wave the entire time. So as I've gotten older, not old, but older,
Right.
I prefer to be in the AC, and I prefer to be away from the elements, meaning the outdoors, the hot, the sweltering heat, or the cold, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And so I've done a lot of more administrative jobs, like
Yeah.
in the, like working alongside with the producers and the what have you, like getting the flights for the actors, being kind of
Okay.
like, like, so yeah, so I've kind of worked more on that side of things now whenever I get hired for jobs. It's not beneath me to do a production assistant job if that's all they offer and it pays well enough. I definitely have a rate now that I won't work underneath, unless we're in dire situations. And I just think that comes with experience and time with it. You start to know your worth
Okay.
and like what when you're starting out, you'll take anything. But if you've done this for 13 years, like if I'm going to work 12, 15-hour days and I'm going to be paid this low of a rate, it's really not worth my time now. From
Sure.
like you weigh those options for yourself, and that'll be different for each person depending on where they are in that journey of doing things. I've worked as a production coordinator, I've worked as an assistant director, I've worked as obviously I've directed my own movies. Um, and I've even done crafty a few times. It's kind of fun to do
Nice.
crafty, because people are always happy to see you. They're there to get a snack, and you're just there to be like a host and entertain. So, and I love doing that in life. So those are the various jobs I've done on film
Mhm.
sets. And also being a second assistant, which is in the
Yeah.
assistant director department, dealing with the hair and makeup, making sure actors are going through and they're on their time, all of those things. So definitely I'm good at the timekeeper kind of, not in life. I'm always fashionably late for everything, but
Yeah.
at work, I'm like on it. So if I'm being paid for it, then yes, I have an incentive to be on time.
That
So
really gave me hope.
yes,
That really gave me, because
two
I
things can be
can
true at
relate.
the same time.
Never mutually exclusive,
Yeah.
right? Wow. Okay, that makes way more sense, and that gives me hope for the industry in Oklahoma for myself as well. And I like to think that it'll do the same for someone else in the audience as
Yeah.
well. So thank
Well,
you
and
for
one
that
thing
insight. Yeah.
Absolutely. One thing I'll mention is that I think for you or for anybody else that's
Mhm.
starting in it, not that you're starting in it, but maybe you are. And
I am. Yes.
okay, it for people like learning anything that you know how to do or that you could see yourself doing, even if it's just for the purposes of being employed on a film set.
Yeah.
Because you're still in that space, you're around the creative space. Maybe you have an aspiration to be an actor, but you also need to eat and make a living, and maybe you haven't
Right.
been called for a role. Then that's an example. It's like if you can learn to do any of those other jobs and that are like where they're always gonna need those things, it's
Yeah.
kind of like job security. So
Yeah.
you know that okay, I may not get the role on this one, but I will get employed on this movie, and I will meet people while I am there who I can then let them know I'm also an actor, and then what I'm saying, like, and then all of a sudden, it's kind of like you're constantly selling yourself, on film sets, but there's so many different ways to get involved on film sets that may not involve specifically the thing you're pursuing. But I say don't shy away from those jobs because they definitely still give you your foot in the door to be able to have those conversations and make those connections. So
And that's super helpful too, because there was one point, I guess at this point a couple of years ago, time flies, that's crazy, where I was told if you want to act, don't don't crew anything. And
mm,
I had a very hard time with that being said to me. One, because it was from someone who I very much respect, and two, I like doing as many things as I can. I
yeah.
like the idea of being able to go to a set and play scripty and be an assistant director and be a second AD when I can. I like the idea of being able to play around with art department and do all of those things while also being the active storyteller on camera and also writing and also doing all these things. So you expressing that gives me a little bit of silent comfort.
Yeah, and I would say I know a lot of people who do it all. Like, I mean, I have a lot of actor friends who also crew who are they work in. I've even seen some ladies do grip department, and then next thing you know, they're the lead in a short film, and I'm like, I didn't know you acted, and they're like, yeah, I do it all. I'm like, so I do think it's kind of a work it to your, like
Yeah,
everyone's going to be different. There might be certain jobs you just don't don't have the capacity or don't want to do, and
yeah.
that's fine. There's, as I mentioned, I don't do camera department. I just
Right.
can't. I mean, I missed that ship to learn how what lens goes here and what. It's too late for me.
Oh,
So, and I don't really have an interest in doing the work to learn it now.
yeah,
So I just accept that that's something I can't do.
yeah.
And so, but there are other things I can do. And so, in that sense, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. And I do think for yourself, like obviously continue to pursue whatever aspect of it you want to do to the fullest, extent. But if something's not happening immediately, then I do still think being involved in the creative community is only going to be an asset to you in the long run. So,
I think so too. Thank you for that. I
yeah.
appreciate that. Let's take everything that we've talked about in terms of work and let's move into how you end up diving into your personal projects and those ebbs and flows of that timeline. Obviously, you're relying on getting calls so we can get paid and we can have money to eat and take care of
Yeah.
ourselves because that's vital.
Yeah.
But because it is in an industry that you love and you also have personal projects that feed your spirit in a different kind of way, how do you keep it fun? Does it ever start to feel like a grind, especially because it is a machine? And how do you keep it fresh and beautiful and creative in the way that it originally began as?
I have I have work wives. I have I think it's just kind of like every job, no matter what, like even if you're a waiter or whatever job you may do,
Mhm.
you have your person or your people,
Yeah.
the people that are your support, your safety net, your source of comfort, someone you can vent to, someone you I do think that those people in your, and that's why I say building those friendships and connections on set are so important. I have people who say, if LaRon's not on it, I'm not doing it, and vice versa. Like where like if we're both up for a job and like, oh, I want LaRon to be right here beside me because he's going to get me through this and this thing and vice versa. I do have those people in my life. And that's more personal for people. It's like find your people, find your tribe, whoever they are. And
Yeah.
if they're not on that particular project, I do think that the way I keep things fun for myself or to keep myself involved is reminding myself that um, I do one for them or maybe two for them and then one for me. Like so doing that work, but remembering that, now that I've accrued up this amount of money, maybe now I can pursue that one thing, I because you need those moments of respite and those moments of getting back to the artistic aspect of it and not just the grind of it, as you mentioned. And so for sure, when I set out to write stories, I'm not prolific at writing. I write a lot in terms of like film reviews and things like that, like pretty often. I have a podcast that I do pretty regularly for the last 6 or 7 years now, a film podcast. So I keep that conversation and that discourse constantly happening, and constantly doing those aspects of the filmmaking process that I love, which is talking about art, dissecting art, and also creating art. Like so. So I find that though finding a balance between making sure that you're making time to make and creating space for you to do the things that you love about this so that it doesn't become just work for you. Because the work is necessary, but it's not all about, just killing yourself. At some point, you do also want to enjoy it, so yeah.
Super duper helpful, especially for me as an overworker when I do work. So big vibes. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
drop the name of that podcast for our audience, please?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It is the Cinematropolis is the website, but I think the actual podcast is called the Cinematic Schematic. We probably have a little over 100 episodes on there, and we review everything from I mean, big juggernaut blockbusters to the smallest and tiniest of indies. So really just running the gambit. If you like movies, we will do a deep dive to 2.5 hour, like dissection of the movie in chunks, and we do separate it, like half of it is spoiler free, and then we get to the middle of it and it's like, okay, now beware if you don't want to know the details and who all lives and dies at the end of this. But we're going to get into that for the people who've already watched it. And we have a lot of fun doing it. My co-host Caleb Masters is a huge media juggernaut, and we've just connected years ago over the Jordan Peele movie Get Out.
Yeah.
He brought me in as a guest host on that, and we just kicked it off. And he, after doing 2 or 3 episodes together and just having such a strong chemistry in terms of our rapport, he was like, "Do you want to be my like permanent co-host on this?" And I was like, well, that's a big ask, and absolutely, I want to do it, and we've been doing it ever since. So yeah,
That'll be linked. I'm
yeah,
linking that.
absolutely.
And that really gives me a beautiful segue because since you have this really awesome podcast where you dissect movies, does it ever pose issue for you in creating your own work where you might get trapped in over dissecting your own material?
There, there is a fear of mine, and I just saw this recently happen in real life, where
Okay.
someone that I follow that is also a film podcaster just recently made his very first feature film. And all the reviews are film critic turned filmmaker. And
Mm.
it's kind of like, aren't those like
This-
diametrically opposed things? And I'm like, I don't think so, because I started as a film critic first, and that was from my love of just watching movies, like my love of the craft of it. And then so much so that I finally developed an interest, in telling a story that might one day hopefully be well reviewed by, the film critic community. But
Yeah.
I do think that it gives me a unique perspective in that regard because I'm a screenwriter, I am a podcaster, I am a film critic, I am a filmmaker.
Mm.
I also work as the head of Pride programming for the Dead Center Film Festival. So I also program movies. So I do think I'm coming at the medium from so many different
A
aspects. But
lot.
I really do just think it gives me a more widespread perspective on the industry, how it works, how it's critiqued, how people receive media, and just the kind of stories that I want to tell, and maybe what I think is resonating with people, and having your finger kind of on the pulse of the culture in that regard, knowing what's resonating with people, what people are critiquing, what people want to see, what's popular right now, those kinds of things. And so I feel like it's just to my benefit to be a part of all those different aspects of the industry. So,
I can completely see that. I I am one of those people where I want to be a film critic so bad in like a personal way. I want to critique the movies I watch.
yeah,
But I love giving 4 to 5 star ratings every time.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
I appreciate that you're able to take all of those angles that for some of
I,
those I kind of struggle, and that's okay.
I do think, as a film critic, I will say I think I'm more lenient than most because
Okay.
I am also a filmmaker. So I do
Got it.
think that I'm able to look at the larger, like, but I think that's something that maybe the average film critic doesn't have, is the
Yeah.
insight to know like maybe what this artist was trying to get across, even if they weren't successful at it. Like, what were they trying to do, and did they do it with a sense of integrity, or
Yeah.
is this provocative for the sake of just being, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
um I do think I'm more lenient than most. I am still able, when I just genuinely, vehemently dislike something, to be able to say that in a way that maybe isn't mean or like just unnecessarily nasty,
I'm glad
because
that you have tact, Laron.
there's
I'm
a
really glad.
certain snark that some critics can have,
Yes.
about things, even if their point is valid. Sometimes the way they're saying it may not be necessary. And so I do find myself being more sensitive to that in that regard. But I do understand what you mean about that struggle. Like, can you really be objective when you yourself are, you know what I mean, play
Yeah.
in your toes in both spaces? And I do think you have to, but it does take a certain level of discernment and discipline to be able to say, I don't like, and also I do this with music as well. So it's kind of like, I don't care for this piece of medium,
Hmm.
but
Right.
that does not mean that you won't. And so I
Right.
can acknowledge that, hey, I'm not the audience for this. I didn't care for this, but I really think that this demographic, whoever that may be,
Sure.
depending on what it is,
Yeah.
will eat this up and love it. And I always make that note in the review, is like,
Yeah.
so that it's not like my opinion is the only one that matters on this thing. And because I say it's not good, is not my approach to film criticism. So yeah.
Everyone listen to Laron's film critic podcast. Um, you're a baddie, and that's all I have to say on that, really.
Thank
If I'm being real. Come on, discernment. Thank you. That really helps me. I want to move a little bit away from that and more into something else you very casually mentioned. Pride programming for Dead Center. What got you into that space? How did you, I guess, in a way, land that position, really? Um, but on a greater scale, I'm giving you like three questions in one. Don't mind me. On a greater scale, what have you loved being able to see in the LGBTQ plus pieces that come through and
Yeah.
do end up offering this perspective for audiences who need to see more of themselves and audiences who don't have any context?
I feel like one of my greatest pleasures and one of my greatest honors is being the head of Pride programming for Dead Center, and that they provided a platform for me to do that. Because as I mentioned, as we started this whole conversation, it was like I was seeking out. Like, I think my whole journey as an artist has been seeking out media that speaks to my lived experience,
Yeah.
and seeing like the disparity of that and how there was just not a lot of content I could cling to. And maybe sometimes content that I really resonated with was way far more mature than what I should have been watching at that particular time. But it was also the only thing that was there, and unfortunately, then that becomes part of your cultivating, about piecing together for yourself, and then carrying that into being a filmmaker who wanted to make movies that basically filled that void for what I didn't see when I was younger. Like, I'm going to make those movies if no one else is going to. So that's kind of like where my storytelling aspect of that comes into. And then when I set out to do that, Dead Center, my first film, as I mentioned earlier, You People, um, premiered at Dead Center in 2018, a year after we shot it, and to two sold out screenings by strangers I didn't know. And it's just insane to be at the Harkins Theater downtown in Oklahoma City, and a theater that I frequent, and to see a line wrapped around the building, with people who by word of mouth or what have you had heard about this young filmmaker that told this story that seemed to be resonating with a really broad group of people, broad and diverse, So doing that, I think and then as I was a very prolific film critic, as I mentioned as well, writing reviews. I'm at the theater every Saturday, basically catching up on the next whatever release that Friday. I'm seeing it, good, bad, or indifferent. I want to see it so I can be part of the discourse around it. And so they saw that in me, and they saw how prolific I was about you consume so much and you have such a unique perspective, and people really resonate with the things that you say, and the reviews that you have. Would you consider coming on as one of our staffers and essentially curating movies that I think I would say Dead Center has always been progressive and open-minded towards marginalized groups, but they themselves didn't have the makeup physically of that on their staff. And
Yeah.
so they were like, while we have always never shied away from content that told these stories, we do think it would be a lot more meaningful and impactful if someone from that community was the one picking those movies, because you're going to find those nuances and things like that that people aren't, maybe we otherwise wouldn't be able to, having not lived in your skin and shoes. So so they made that job for me essentially. And so I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and it's been just really meaningful, and I take it very seriously, that I am putting in front, I'm basically creating taste for people. We're the tastemakers of the city in that sense, that we're plucking these movies from international, local, all over the world, and truncating it to, a couple of blocks to really shine a light on LGBT artists that are, you know, um, very candidly telling their stories to us. And so I take a lot of pride in being able to being the person to pluck those movies out. And it's always something I'm very proud of at the end of the year once I have it all assembled together. And I'm always very excited to show it to people. And so it's a very cool role and I really commend Dead Center for creating that platform for me to do that. And I do think like creating spaces like that for people in any marginalized group, it's great, because I really do think that it helps us see the world the way that it is, and not just one thing. There's so many people's, whether you're a woman, whether you're versus, or whether you're poor, or whether you're Jewish, or whether you're whatever those things, whatever it might be for you. There's a story that speaks to you specifically and to your community specifically. And so it's nice to have as much of a diverse tapestry of voices and points of view as possible. So yes, that's definitely a job that I take a lot of pride in.
Absolutely. I was really, really last year, I guess this year. This year was my first Dead
Oh,
Center ever.
okay.
And so getting to attend and getting to be within the LGBTQ plus block specifically, getting to see what was curated there, it is, I acknowledge within my skin and my body and my identity, like I'm a woman, but I'm a white woman and I'm pretty straight. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm pretty
Yeah.
straight. And being able to sit down and decide to open my own mind and to open myself to new perspectives that I don't have, it's a really invaluable experience that I highly, highly, highly stress and
Yeah.
encourage to others within similar spots as me to do so for themselves, for the
Yeah.
world around them. I think
Yeah.
it's incredibly important, and I really love what you were able to curate. And I'm just really excited for more opportunity to be able to
Yeah.
support your work as well as the work of so many others within our community and outside of our community, Like it's such a wide, there's a wide range,
Yeah.
as you said, so many international films as well within Dead Center. I digress.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's the power of, you asked me early in this interview, like why cinema, why movies? And I've always felt that cinema, as my favorite film critic, now deceased, who coined the two thumbs up phrase, Roger Ebert, was like it's a machine for generating empathy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what music is, as we say, is the universal language. I think that film is kind of intrinsically tied in all of that, in the sense that it puts us in front of worlds and people and perspectives and vulnerability and humanity and all those things. And we are forced for the duration of that time to connect with somebody from a background that we may not have come from, but
Yeah.
we leave feeling more empathetic towards those people and a better understanding of those people. And I think the more that we do that as people, as humans, is taking us ourselves out of our comfort zone and putting ourselves in spaces that maybe don't have to share the same ideas or the same lived worlds as we do, we
Yeah.
come away from that having a better understanding of just our own common humanity. And you start to see that we're not that different. We really aren't. There's so many, we all have hopes, we all have dreams, we all have pain, we all have joys, heartbreak, love, all those things. We share those. That's our human experience, and so, and I think it would help, demystify and take away all of the prejudice and all these kind of like slanted, like narrow-minded kind of viewpoints that we have of people. I think if you met these people, you wouldn't feel the same way as you do now. I really believe that if the more you expose yourself to people different from yourself, I do think it makes us better people.
I could not agree more. Beautifully said.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to ask you one of my final questions where you just might repeat some of what you just said because you began to answer it in
Okay.
in, in that. But I wanna see what else you got.
Yeah.
Right. So, I know I have worked with an arts advocacy for a long time, and I come from an innate belief that our world would not run without creativity. And I know for a fact that my life would not be what it is without the power, the outlet, the way of expression that the arts give. Based on everything that you have shared with me in this, I want to know why you believe the arts and creativity is important within your life,
Hmm.
and then what makes it important to the world.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We say it's as I mentioned, like certain phrases, like as I mentioned before, the representation matters. It's
Yes.
something that it's easy to say. It's easy to, you think you know what it means, you think you can relate to it, but the full weight of it isn't really felt unless you're the person who needs that expression to be true. Like I need representation to be there so that I can continue to feel like I belong in the world and
Yeah.
that there's something out there that is reflecting my experience. I am a human being that is just as valuable and as important as the next person.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do think that art and creativity, we learn this very, very, I mean, a lot of people learn this during COVID. When we
Uh,
were saddled and couldn't go anywhere, the only thing you had to get you through your slump, your depression, your boredom, your was art, was watching movies, listening to music, like being with nature, being with, there's a lot that comes from what I mean, art is just it's very healing, I think, to the world. And I think this because it is an expression of our humanity. And so I do think that outside of it just having cool effects or a good performance or a good thing, it's something that unifies us because again, it reflects back to us, our lived experiences as human beings on this earth, and so, and I do think that that communal experience of watching a movie in a dark room, with other people, is you're not thinking about what political affiliation the person beside you had or what have you. You're all having a, a singular experience, with this piece of art that a community of other artists came together to put in front of you. And so if you look at that way, it's this constant idea of reframing, the idea that we are all one, we are all one human race, and and we all have hopes and dreams and beating hearts and souls. And so, and I do think that in those moments when we're not listening to all the noise, we're able to just exist amongst ourselves. And so I think that's what art is for a lot of people. And so, yeah.
I'm
Hang that up in the Louvre. Record, record
replace a
that.
couple other things. That'll be fine.
Record that on loop and put it on the Louvre. I don't know how I pulled that out of myself. It was
Being here. That's what that did.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take that.
Yes, yes.
I actually fibbed. I totally lied to you. I have one more question,
Okay.
and it is strictly for the benefit of our audience. How would you say that people can go support the potential production of your second movie, first of all? And second of all, how can people support filmmaking right now?
Oh, absolutely. In terms of supporting my film, I think if you follow my social media, any of which I'm sure you will link in various forms, um, I am regularly posting on there about whatever I have going on. So if we need extras, if we need someone to just share whatever, getting the word out, particularly once the movie's made, that we'll need to get it in front of people too. So there's a lot of different, I think just following the journey as I parse out information about that throughout that process would be very helpful. In terms of supporting arts, I definitely think people need to see movies in theaters. I know streaming is taking over everything and it's so much easier to be at home, and there is some benefit, to seeing something at home and getting views there. But truly, movies thrive and they have to have that support. So when you go as a patron to the theater and see a movie, you really are paying so that those people can continue to do work. So I do think it's important to see movies in theaters as they're intended to be seen. Watch them again at home. Like that's my theory, like so or my stance on that. But I do think support your local artists, get involved wherever you can. If you can volunteer on a film set, you can be an extra. If you can, attend a film festival and go and see people's movies that are trying to, get exposure and have the same aspirations as I had early on. Yeah, I mean, getting involved in that sense is a great way to help the local film community for sure.
Agreed, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, people go eat popcorn in the theater. Go eat popcorn in the theater, and then go bring your own popcorn, depending on the festival, and go
Yeah,
see movies there.
absolutely.
Go expose
Absolutely.
yourself to new art.
Absolutely. And there's film festivals all through Oklahoma. So if you're local and you're listening to this, Dead Center is the largest one, the Oscar qualifying one, but there are so many other little pocket pop-up ones that we have all over the city all year round. And I try to attend as many as I can because you never know who you're going to discover or who is going to be your next colleague on your next movie. So there's that.
Here's hoping. Laron, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, absolutely.